Get out of my house. Mark's voice sliced through the silence, cold as the glass door that would soon slam shut. Grace stood frozen, clutching the positive pregnancy test, her heart pounding with a fragile hope that this child might mend their unraveling bond. But her key no longer fit the lock. She rang the bell, dread pooling in her chest. The door swung open, revealing Amber in Mark's bathrobe, flaunting a glittering necklace Grace recognized from her receipt. Mark deserves someone better, Amber sneered, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Through the glass, Grace saw Mark pouring wine, his gaze indifferent, as if she were a stranger. "Leave my property," he said, emotionless. Amber clinked her glass against his, the sound a final stab. Grace stood in her elegant silk dress, beside trash bags holding her life, as their laughter mocked her ruin. What will become of Grace? Can she rise from this betrayal? If this story grips you, subscribe to the channel and share where and when you're tuning in. Morning coffee or late night scroll. Your guesses for Grace's journey are welcome below. Will she find strength, or will the past haunt her? Stay with us to uncover her fate. The chandelier's golden light bathed the dining room in a warm glow, casting prisms across crystal glasses and polished silverware. Grace glided through the crowd, her pastel pink bodycon dress hugging her curves, its square neckline framing her collarbone, short puff sleeves softening her elegance, and mermaid hem flaring delicately at her knees. Her black hair, straightened to a glossy sheen, was swept into a sleek chignon, each strand disciplined into place. She was Mark's masterpiece, a living jewel displayed for the elite gathered in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns murmured admiration, their eyes lingering on her as Mark's hand rested possessively on her waist. "Smile, darling," Mark whispered, his breath warm against her ear, though his tone carried an edge. Grace's lips curved upward, but her chest tightened. She moved through the room, offering polite nods, her every gesture rehearsed under Mark's watchful gaze. He introduced her with pride. "This is Grace, my wife." But his fingers pressed into her side, a silent command to stand straighter, to shine brighter. She complied, her heart a quiet drumbeat of unease. At the table, as waiters served foie gras and vintage Bordeaux, Grace reached for her glass. Her hand trembled, and a single drop of wine splashed onto the pristine tablecloth. The room didn't notice, but Mark did. His smile remained charming for the guests, but under the table, his grip on her wrist was iron, his nails digging into her skin. "Careful, Grace," he said softly, his voice a velvet blade. "We can't afford mistakes." Her pulse raced, the sting of his grip lingering as she forced a laugh, brushing off the moment as if it were nothing. The evening wore on, and Grace's cheeks ached from smiling. She caught snippets of conversation, stocks, mergers, politics, but her role was to dazzle, not to speak. During a lull, she excused herself, slipping into the hallway where Mark's voice carried from his study. "Mother, I've told you she's fine," he said, his tone sharp. "Your expectations are traditional, I know, but we'll manage." Grace paused, her breath catching. Traditional? What did that mean? When Mark emerged, she asked, "Is everything okay with your mom?" He waved a hand, his smile tight. "Just family nonsense. Don't worry your pretty head." The dismissal stung, planting a seed of doubt in her chest. Later, alone in their bedroom, Grace opened a drawer and found her old sketchbook, its pages yellowed but alive with vibrant landscapes from her childhood. Rolling hills, windswept trees, a world unshackled. She traced a sketch of a meadow, her fingers trembling with a longing she couldn't name. Mark appeared behind her, his reflection in the mirror looming over her shoulder. "What's this?" he asked, his tone light but patronizing. "Grace, my little artist." He chuckled, as if her drawings were a childish whim, not a piece of her soul. "You don't need this tonight. You're my star out there." He closed the sketchbook, his hand lingering on hers, and she felt the weight of his words. Her art, like her, was ornamental, not essential. Grace nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. She set the sketchbook aside, her fingers brushing the leather cover one last time. Mark kissed her forehead, his lips cool, and left to rejoin the guests. She stood before the full-length mirror, her dress a perfect shell, her hair a disciplined crown. But as she studied her reflection, her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of something restless, something caged. She adjusted her chignon, smoothing a stray strand, but her hands shook. The penthouse, with its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, felt like a golden prison, its walls closing in. Mark's voice called her back to the party and she returned, her smile a mask. As she passed a guest, a woman in a sapphire gown, she overheard a whisper. She's stunning, but so contained. The word pierced her, echoing her unspoken fear. Contained. Was that all she was? Mark's hand found hers again, guiding her through the crowd. But his touch felt like a tether, not a comfort. The seed of doubt grew, its roots curling around her heart. As the night ended, the guests departed, leaving the penthouse silent, save for the clink of glasses being cleared. Mark loosened his tie, his demeanor shifting to one of quiet satisfaction. You were perfect tonight, he said, but his praise felt like a verdict. He mentioned a business trip in the morning, his tone casual, as if her world revolved around his schedule. Grace nodded, her voice trapped in her throat. Alone again, she slipped out of the dress, the fabric pooling at her feet like shed skin. Standing in her slip, she faced the mirror once more. The woman staring back was flawless, polished, poised, Mark's creation. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a whisper of defiance, a yearning to break free. She reached for the sketchbook, her fingers hovering, but didn't open it. Not tonight. She turned off the light, the darkness swallowing her reflection, and climbed into bed, the weight of the evening pressing on her chest. Somewhere, deep within, a crack was forming, too small to see but impossible to ignore. The clink of Grace's earrings against the vanity mirror echoed in the quiet bedroom as she prepared for Mark's return. Her silk dress, a deep emerald chosen from his favorites, clung to her frame, its smooth lines accentuating her elegance. She ran the flat iron over her black hair, taming every strand into submission, though a few stubborn curls fought back at the roots. Her reflection was flawless, a portrait of the wife Mark expected, but her eyes held a shadow of the unease that had taken root the night of the dinner party. She pushed it down, arranging candles and a carefully plated dinner on the dining table, hoping to recapture the warmth of their early days. Mark's key turned in the lock, and Grace's heart lifted, only to sink as he stepped inside. His face, once lit with adoration, was now a mask of indifference, his suit rumpled from travel. Hey, he said, dropping his briefcase without a glance at the table. Grace stepped forward, her smile tentative. I made your favorite, roast lamb, she said, her voice soft with hope. He barely nodded, brushing past her to the bar cart, pouring whiskey with a clatter of ice. Long trip, he muttered, his tone clipped, as if her effort was an inconvenience. She sat across from him at dinner, the candles flickering between them. How was Chicago, she asked, twirling her fork. Mark's eyes flicked to her, sharp and critical. Your hair's off, he said, gesturing vaguely. It's not as sleek as usual. And that dress? It's too much for just us. His words landed like pebbles in still water, rippling through her confidence. She touched her hair, feeling the faint curl at the nape, and forced a laugh. I'll fix it tomorrow, she said, but her throat tightened, the weight of his disapproval pressing on her chest. Later, as they sat on the couch, Grace tried to bridge the gap. Remember that night at the jazz club, she said, her voice wistful. You stood up for me when that guy got rude. You were my hero. The memory was vivid, Mark's arm around her, his voice firm, protective. She searched his face for a spark of that man, but he leaned back, his expression hard. Don't live in the past, Grace, he snapped, standing to refill his glass. The dismissal cut deeper than his critiques, slicing through the fragile thread of their shared history. That night, as Mark slept, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Grace hesitated, then glanced at the screen. A message from Mother glowed. She's not right for the big plan, Mark. Think carefully. Her breath caught, the words a cold fist around her heart. What plan? Before she could process, another notification flashed. A call log with Amber at odd hours. Her mind raced to the jewelry receipt she'd found in his coat pocket last week, a sapphire necklace she'd never received. She set the phone down, her hands trembling, the seed of doubt from the party now a thorny vine twisting inside her. The next morning, Grace stood before the mirror, her flat iron cooling on the vanity. She stared at her reflection, the emerald dress still pristine, but her hair betrayed her. A curl had sprung free, defiant against the sleek lines Mark demanded. She reached for the iron, then stopped. The curl felt alive, a whisper of the girl she used to be, the one who sketched wild meadows and laughed without fear. She tucked it behind her ear, her fingers lingering, as if touching a secret. Mark emerged from the bedroom, his eyes scanning her. "Fix that hair before we go out tonight," he said, his tone flat but commanding. "I've got clients to impress." Grace nodded, but her reflection seemed to waver, the polished surface cracking. She thought of the sketchbook, hidden in the drawer, its pages calling to her. On impulse, she pulled it out, flipping to a half-finished drawing of a stormy sea. Her pencil hovered, then pressed down, tracing waves with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. For a moment she was free, the lines flowing like a rebellion against Mark's rules. But his voice broke the spell. "Grace, we're late," he called, his impatience a leash yanking her back. She closed the sketchbook, her heart sinking. As she followed him out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, she caught her reflection in a hallway mirror. The curl had escaped again, a small act of defiance. She didn't tuck it away this time, but her stomach churned with a mix of fear and longing. Who was she without Mark's approval? The question lingered unanswered as they stepped into the elevator, his hand on her back not a comfort, but a claim. That night, at another glittering event, Grace played her role, her smile a practiced mask. But the message from his mother, the name Amber, and the weight of the necklace she'd never wear gnawed at her. Her hair, though straightened, felt heavy, as if it carried the burden of her doubts. She glanced at Mark, charming the room, and saw a stranger where her husband once stood. The cracks in her perfect life were spreading, and deep within, a quiet voice whispered that she couldn't ignore them much longer. Grace's hands trembled as she held the pregnancy test, the two pink lines a beacon in the storm of her crumbling world. She stood in the bathroom, the mirror reflecting her emerald silk dress from the night before, now wrinkled from sleepless hours. Her hair, still straightened but fraying at the edges with defiant curls, framed a face alight with fragile hope. This child, she thought, could be the bridge to bring Mark back. The man who once shielded her, not the stranger who critiqued her every move. She resolved to make tonight perfect, to rekindle the love she clung to like a lifeline. She chose a sapphire silk gown, its bodycon silhouette and mermaid hem a nod to Mark's old compliments, a desperate bid to summon his affection. Hours at the vanity tamed her hair into a sleek chignon, each strand a sacrifice to his expectations. Her heart raced as she tucked the test into her purse, imagining his eyes softening, his arms pulling her close. She cooked his favorite pasta, set the table with candles, and waited, her fingers brushing the smooth silk, as if it could armor her against the doubts gnawing at her core. The clock ticked past 8, then 9. Mark's absence stretched the silence, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Grace's hope wavered, but she clung to the image of their child, a tiny heartbeat binding them. When headlights finally flashed through the window, she stood, smoothing her dress, her smile a fragile offering. The door opened, but Mark's face was a storm cloud, his eyes avoiding hers. "Late meeting," he muttered, tossing his keys onto the counter. "What's all this?" He gestured at the table, his tone flat, as if her effort was a chore. "I have something to tell you," Grace said, her voice quivering with anticipation. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, loosening his tie. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." Her heart sank, but she pressed on, pulling the test from her purse. "Mark, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, a plea for connection. His eyes flickered, not with joy, but with something cold, calculating. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice devoid of warmth. "That's unexpected." Before she could speak, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening, and Grace caught a name. Amber. Her stomach twisted, the memory of late-night calls and the sapphire necklace receipt flooding back. "Mark, please," she whispered, but he was already moving toward the door. "I need air," he said, leaving her standing alone, the candles dripping wax onto the untouched meal. Desperate to hold on to him, Grace drove to their townhouse upstate, a place Mark used for weekend retreats. The pregnancy test burned in her purse, a talisman of hope. She arrived at dusk, the house's glass facade glinting under the fading sun. Her key, once a symbol of their shared life, refused to turn in the lock. Her pulse quickened as she rang the bell, dread replacing hope. The door opened and Amber stood there, draped in Mark's bathrobe, a sapphire necklace gleaming at her throat, the one from the receipt. "Mark deserves someone better," Amber said, her voice dripping with scorn, her eyes glinting with victory. Grace's breath caught, her gaze darting past Amber. Through the glass door she saw Mark pouring wine, his face impassive, as if she were a ghost. "Mark!" she choked out, clutching her purse. He stepped forward, his eyes cold as winter. "Leave my property, Grace," he said, his voice ablade. Amber smirked, raising her glass to clink against his, the sound piercing Grace's heart like a gunshot. The door slammed shut, and through the glass she saw them laugh, their silhouettes mocking her ruin. Grace stood frozen, her sapphire gown a cruel irony, its elegance clashing with the trash bags piled beside her, her clothes, her books, her life discarded. The pregnancy test slipped from her hand, landing in the dirt. She knelt to retrieve it, her fingers brushing the silk, now stained with dust. Her chignon unraveled, curls springing free as if her body refused to play Mark's game any longer. Tears burned her eyes, but she choked them back, the weight of his words, "someone better," echoing alongside his mother's message about the big plan. What plan? The question gnawed, but the answer was clear. She was no longer part of it. She stumbled away from the house, the test clutched to her chest. The night swallowed her, the gown dragging through gravel, its hem tearing. Her hair, now a tangle of curls, clung to her tear-streaked face. She was a queen dethroned, her kingdom reduced to the spark of life in her womb. That spark was all she had left, a faint pulse urging her to survive. She remembered a flyer for a women's shelter, its address etched in her mind from a chance glance. With nothing but her purse and the tattered gown, Grace turned toward the city, each step a defiance against the darkness threatening to consume her. The city's pulse throbbed around Grace as she stumbled through the night, her sapphire silk gown now a tattered relic of her shattered hope. The fabric, once a symbol of her desperate bid to win Mark back, clung to her legs, muddied and torn at the hem. Her hair, freed from its chignon, hung in damp curls, the rain-soaked strands reclaiming their natural defiance against the sleek perfection Mark had demanded. In her hand, the pregnancy test was a fragile anchor, its plastic edges digging into her palm as she wandered, directionless, under the neon glow of Manhattan's streets. The clink of Amber's glass against Mark's still echoed in her ears, a cruel refrain mocking her exile. Grace's heels, impractical for the wet pavement, twisted under her, and she sank onto a bench at a deserted bus stop. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, pressing against her chest. A cracked mirror lay discarded nearby, reflecting a stranger, her face pale, mascara streaked, curls wild and unyielding. Mark's voice hissed in her mind, "You're nothing without me." She stared into the mirror, her breath hitching. Was he right? Had she ever been more than his creation? The thought clawed at her, dragging her toward a void where surrender seemed easier than fighting. Her fingers tightened around the test, the two pink lines a faint pulse against the darkness. She closed her eyes and a memory flickered. Not of Mark's warmth, but of his mother's cold words in that cryptic message. "She's not right for the big plan." The phrase haunted her, a puzzle piece she couldn't place. What plan? To replace her with Amber. To erase her. The betrayal stung anew, not just from Mark, but from a family that had never accepted her. Her chest ached, not with tears, but with a hollow rage. At him, at herself, for believing in his love. A chill wind cut through her gown, and Grace shivered, curling into herself. The bench's cold metal bit into her thighs, grounding her in the reality of her homelessness. No money, no phone, just a purse with a few crumpled dollars in the test. She thought of the townhouse, its glass walls now a fortress barring her from her past, her sketches, her clothes, her life, all stuffed into trash bags, discarded like refuse. The indignity burned, but it was the child within her that kept her from breaking. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling nothing yet imagining everything, a heartbeat, a future, a reason to endure. In the mirror's jagged reflection, Grace saw a girl from years ago, the one who sketched meadows under open skies, her laughter unbound. That girl had dreams, a spark Mark had dulled. She reached for that spark now, her fingers trembling as she traced an imaginary line in the air, sketching a horizon only she could see. The act was small, futile against the city's vast indifference, but it steadied her. Her art, buried so long, was still there, an ember waiting to flare. A passerby's shout jolted her back, a drunk man staggering past oblivious to her. The city didn't care, but Grace remembered a flyer, glimpsed weeks ago near a subway station, a women's shelter, its address a faint memory. She stood, her legs shaky, the gown dragging like a chain. Each step was a battle, her heels catching on cracks, her curls plastered to her face. The shelter was miles away, but it was a destination, a lifeline. She whispered to her unborn child, "We'll make it," her voice barely audible, but fierce. The streets blurred into a maze of lights and shadows. Grace's feet bled in her shoes, the silk gown now a sodden weight. Passers-by glanced at her, a fallen debutante, a curiosity, but none stopped. She didn't expect them to. Mark's world had taught her that beauty was a currency, and hers was spent. Yet the thought of her child, a life untouched by his cruelty, fueled her. She imagined naming her hope, a promise to herself. After hours of walking, the shelter's faded sign emerged from the dawn's gray light. Grace's breath hitched as she knocked, her knuckles raw. A woman opened the door, her eyes kind but weary. "You're safe here," she said, her voice a balm. Grace stepped inside, the gown trailing dirt across the threshold. She clutched the pregnancy test, its plastic warm from her grip. The door closed behind her, shutting out the city's roar, and for the first time that night, Grace felt a flicker of possibility. She was at rock bottom, her polished facade shattered, but the curls framing her face felt like a rebellion, a sign that the girl who dreamed in colors might still live. Grace stood at the shelter's threshold, the weight of her tattered sapphire gown pulling at her like a fading dream. Her curls, now fully unbound, clung to her rain-dampened face, a wild crown reclaiming its place after years of restraint. The pregnancy test, still clutched in her hand, was her only tether to purpose as the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room smelling of coffee and worn linoleum. The woman who greeted her, with gray-streaked braids and eyes that held both steel and warmth, introduced herself as Mama Rose. "You're safe here, child," she said, her voice a lifeline pulling Grace from the abyss of the night before. Inside, the shelter hummed with quiet resilience. Women's voices murmured, a baby cried softly, and a fluorescent bulb flickered overhead. Grace's legs trembled as she followed Mama Rose to a small room with a cot and a chipped dresser. "Leave that dress," Mama Rose said, handing her a stack of donated clothes, a faded sweatshirt and jeans, stiff but clean. Grace hesitated, her fingers tracing the silk, now stained with mud and betrayal. Shedding it felt like peeling away Mark's hold, a raw, liberating pain. She slipped into the jeans, the fabric coarse against her skin, and caught her reflection in a cracked mirror. Her curls sprang free, untamed, a defiant echo of the girl she'd buried under Mark's rules. Mama Rose sat across from her, her gaze piercing. "I've seen that look," she said. "I walked away from a man who thought he owned me, took my kids and never looked back." Her words landed softly, a bridge to Grace's pain. "You're not alone here." Grace's throat tightened, Mark's voice still whispering in her mind. "You're nothing without me." She wanted to believe Mama Rose, but doubt clung like a damp cloth. The common room was a patchwork of stories, women of all ages, their faces etched with survival. Grace sat silently, her hands folded over her stomach, the pregnancy test now tucked into her pocket. A woman named Lena, with sharp eyes and a scar across her cheek, scoffed as Grace passed. "Look at her. Too fragile for this place," Lena said, loud enough for all to hear. "She won't last a week." The words stung, echoing Mark's disdain, and Grace shrank into her sweatshirt, her curls falling over her face like a shield. Mama Rose's hand landed on her shoulder, firm but kind. "Strength ain't what you've lost, girl," she said. "It's what you build from what's left." Her words were a spark, igniting something dormant in Grace's chest. Mama Rose led her to a corner table, sliding a pencil and a worn notebook across it. "Draw something," she said, her tone a challenge. Grace's fingers froze, the memory of her sketchbook, left behind in Mark's trash bags, cutting deep. She thought of his patronizing laugh, his dismissal of her art as a childish whim. But Mama Rose's eyes held no judgment, only expectation. Grace gripped the pencil, her hands shaking as she traced a single line. A horizon, jagged and uncertain. The act was small, but it felt like defiance, a reclaiming of the girl who once painted worlds in secret. The other women's stories filtered through the room, each one a thread weaving Grace into their tapestry. A young mother spoke of fleeing fists, an older woman of losing everything to debt. Grace listened, her heart thawing, realizing her pain wasn't singular. Yet Mark's shadow lingered. His mother's cryptic message about the big plan gnawed at her. Was it Amber? A legacy she'd never fit? The uncertainty fueled her resolve to protect the life growing inside her, a life Mark would never touch. Lena's voice broke her thoughts, taunting again. "What's a princess like you gonna do here?" she sneered, gesturing at Grace's curls. "Go back to your fancy life." Grace's cheeks burned, but Mama Rose stepped in, her voice low and fierce. "Enough, Lena. She's here, same as you. Let her find her way." Lena backed off, but her words echoed Grace's fear. Was she too broken to rebuild? She touched her curls, no longer straightened into submission, and felt a flicker of pride. They were hers, not Mark's. That night on the cot, Grace lay awake, the shelter's murmurs a strange comfort. She pulled out the notebook, sketching by the light of a dim bulb. The lines formed a woman's silhouette, standing against a storm, her hair wild and free. It wasn't finished, but it was a start. Mama Rose's words echoed, "Build from what's left." Grace pressed her hand to her stomach, whispering to her child, "We'll build together." The shelter's walls, worn and scarred, felt less like a refuge and more like a forge, where Grace could hammer her shattered pieces into something new. Her curls, her art, her unborn child. They were fragments of a self she was only beginning to reclaim. Grace's fingers curled around the pencil, its weight both foreign and familiar as she sat at the shelter's worn table, the notebook open before her. The sweatshirt and jeans she wore, borrowed from the shelter's donations, hung loosely on her frame, but the colorful scarf she'd tied around her neck, a thrift store find, added a spark of defiance. Her curls, now fully embraced, cascaded over her shoulders, each coil a testament to the self she was clawing back from Mark's shadow. The shelter's hum, women's voices, the clatter of dishes, faded as she traced a line, her hand trembling with a hunger she hadn't felt in years. 2 months had passed since she'd crossed the shelter's threshold, and though Mark's voice still whispered, "You're nothing," in her quiet moments, she was beginning to fight back. Mama Rose's words echoed in her mind. Build from what's left. Grace had enrolled in the shelter's job training program, learning bookkeeping and computer skills. Each lesson a brick in the foundation of a life she could call her own. Her pregnancy, now visible in the gentle curve of her stomach, anchored her to this new path. She whispered to her child at night, promising a world where they'd both be free. But it was the notebook, gifted by Mama Rose, that became her sanctuary. She'd sketched that first jagged horizon, a small rebellion against the polished shell Mark had molded her into. Now she dared to dream in lines and shades. One evening, as rain tapped the shelter's windows, Grace sat with her notebook, the pencil moving with purpose. She drew the townhouse door, its glass unyielding, but in her sketch, She stood tall, her silhouette defiant against the storm beyond. The image poured out of her, raw and unfiltered, transforming the memory of that shattering night into something fierce. Mama Rose peered over her shoulder, her braids brushing Grace's arm. "That's not just pain, child," she said, her voice low and warm. "That's power." Grace's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. For the first time, she saw her art not as a whim, but as a voice. One Mark had silenced, but she could reclaim. The shelter's community, though rough-edged, began to feel like a tapestry of survival. Grace listened to the women's stories, tales of escape, loss, and quiet triumphs, each one weaving her closer to them. Yet Lena's sharp tongue still cut. "Drawing pictures won't pay for diapers," she sneered one morning, eyeing Grace's notebook. Grace flinched, the old fear of inadequacy flaring, Mark's dismissal of her art echoing in Lena's words. But she met Lena's gaze, her voice steady. "It's not just pictures. It's me." Lena raised an eyebrow, but a flicker of respect crossed her face before she turned away. Grace's days filled with purpose. Classes by morning, sketching by night. She learned to braid her curls, weaving them into intricate patterns that felt like armor, a celebration of her natural self. Her scarf, now a signature, changed colors daily: red, turquoise, gold, each hue a brushstroke of her emerging identity. She thought of Mark less, but his mother's cryptic message about the big plan still gnawed at her, a reminder of the life that had rejected her. Was it wealth? Status? Amber's role in their scheme? The questions lingered, but Grace refused to let them define her. Her child, her art, her new skills, they were her plan now. One afternoon, Mama Rose called her to the common room, where a small easel stood, a gift from a local charity. "Paint something for us," Mama Rose said, her eyes gleaming with challenge. Grace hesitated, the weight of the other women's gazes heavy. She thought of the townhouse, of Amber's smirk, of Mark's cold command to leave. Her hand moved, sketching a portrait of Mama Rose, her strong jaw, her knowing eyes, the braids framing a face that had weathered storms. The lines flowed, bold and alive, capturing the woman who'd given her a pencil and a purpose. When she finished, the room fell silent. A young woman, barely 20, whispered, "That's Mama Rose, but it's more." The others nodded, their faces soft with recognition. Lena, leaning against the wall, said nothing, but her usual scowl was absent. Grace's chest swelled, not with pride but with connection. Her art, once buried under Mark's disdain, had spoken to these women, reflecting their shared strength. She touched her stomach, feeling her child's faint kick, and smiled. "This is for you too," she whispered. That night, Grace sat alone, her notebook open to a new page. She sketched a meadow not from her childhood, but from a future she imagined, one where her child ran free, where she was whole. The lines were tentative but hopeful, a map of a life she was building. The shelter's walls, scarred and sturdy, seemed to hum with possibility. Grace's curls bounced as she leaned over the page, her scarf a splash of crimson against the gray cot. Mark's voice was fainter now, drowned by the rhythm of her own heart. She wasn't whole yet, but she was rediscovering Grace. Not his creation, but the woman she was meant to be. Grace adjusted the crimson scarf draped over her shoulder, its vibrant hue a stark contrast to the loose linen pants and burnt orange blouse she wore. Her curls, now a proud cascade, were swept into a high, carefree bun, a few tendrils framing her face with defiant elegance. 2 years had passed since the shelter became her refuge, and the woman in the mirror was no longer Mark's creation. She was Grace, mother, artist, survivor, standing in a small Brooklyn gallery, her heart pounding as she prepared for her first exhibition. Her daughter Hope, now a toddling burst of laughter with curls like her own, played in a corner with a volunteer, her tiny hands clutching a crayon. Grace's life, once reduced to trash bags, was now a canvas of her own making. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, its white walls adorned with Grace's paintings, each a chapter of her journey. The townhouse door, reimagined as a portal to freedom. Mama Rose's portrait, fierce and radiant. A meadow where hope could run. Grace's fingers brushed the frame of the door painting, its bold strokes a testament to the art that had saved her. She'd spent mornings at a community college, learning graphic design to support herself, and nights painting, pouring her pain and hope into every canvas. The shelter's lessons, bookkeeping, resilience, sisterhood, had built a foundation, but her art was the heartbeat. Mama Rose stood beside her, her braids now streaked with more gray, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You did this, child," she said, her voice a warm anchor. "You turned your scars into stars." Grace squeezed her hand, gratitude swelling in her chest. The shelter's women, some now friends, mingled among the guests, their presence a reminder of the community that had held her up. Even Lena, once her critic, offered a nod from across the room, her scar softened by a rare smile. But the past wasn't done with Grace. That morning a letter had arrived, its crisp envelope bearing the name of Mark's mother. For the family's honor, relinquish custody of the child. The words sliced through her, reviving the echo of the big plan that had haunted her. Mark's world, with its cold calculations, still reached for her daughter. Grace's hands shook as she stood before the gallery's mirror, the letter crumpled in her purse. She thought of Mark's dismissal, Amber's smirk, the glass door slamming shut. The fear flared, but she crushed it, tearing the letter into pieces. "You don't get to touch her," she whispered, her reflection fierce. The exhibition opened, and strangers filled the space, their murmurs a hum of curiosity. Grace moved among them, her blouse a blaze of color, her bun a crown of confidence. A woman in a navy coat paused before the townhouse painting, her eyes glistening. "I see myself here," she said, her voice trembling. "I left a man like that." Grace's heart clenched, her art a mirror for others' pain. Another guest, an older man with a critic's badge, nodded at Mama Rose's portrait. "Raw, honest," he said. "You've got something real." The words landed like a gift, affirming the talent Mark had belittled. As Grace spoke to a buyer, a shadow crossed her path. A lawyer sent by Mark's family approached, his briefcase gleaming. "Miss Thompson, we need to discuss your daughter's custody," he said, his tone clipped. The gallery's warmth faded, Mark's world intruding once more. Grace's pulse raced, but she squared her shoulders, her curls bouncing. "Tell them I said no," she said, her voice steady, a blade of her own. "Hope is mine." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded, retreating. Grace exhaled, her hand resting on her stomach, where hope had once grown. She'd fought for her daughter before she was born. She'd fight now. The night wore on, and Grace stood before her paintings, hope now asleep in her arms. The gallery's lights cast a soft glow, illuminating the meadow painting, a vision of freedom. She thought of the shelter, of Mama Rose's pencil, of the women who'd shared her pain. Her art had given them a voice too. Lena approached, her usual edge softened. "Didn't think you'd make it," she said, a grudging respect in her eyes. "Guess I was wrong." Grace smiled, the weight of her journey settling into pride. As the crowd thinned, Grace caught her reflection in a glass frame. The woman staring back was vibrant, unapologetic, her curls, her colors, her strength all her own. Mark's voice, once a relentless echo, was now a faint murmur, drowned by the life she'd built. The letter, the lawyer, the big plan. They were ghosts, powerless against her. She kissed Hope's forehead, whispering, "We're enough." The gallery, filled with her art and her people, was proof of a different kind of strength, one forged in fire, painted in hope, and hers alone. Grace's laughter mingled with Hope's giggles as they chased falling leaves in the park, the autumn sun casting a golden glow over their path. Her jeans hugged her comfortably, paired with a soft cream sweater that draped loosely over her frame, its simplicity a quiet rebellion against the polished gowns of her past. Her curls, now a vibrant cascade, danced freely in the breeze, untamed and unapologetic, a crown of her reclaimed self. Hope, her 3-year-old daughter, darted ahead, her curls bouncing, her eyes, Mark's eyes, sparkling with joy. Grace's heart swelled, the weight of her journey from that rain-soaked night to this moment a tapestry of scars and triumphs. Her art, now sold in local galleries, and her job as a graphic designer, had built a life where she and Hope thrived, free from the shadows of Mark's control. The park was alive with families, dogs barking, and the rustle of leaves underfoot. Grace knelt to tie Hope's shoelace, her fingers deft, her smile easy. The exhibition's success still warmed her. The memory of her paintings, each a piece of her soul, connecting with strangers. Mama Rose's portrait hung in her small apartment, a reminder of the woman who'd handed her a pencil and a purpose. The letter from Mark's mother, demanding Hope's custody, was a distant sting, its threat diffused by Grace's fierce refusal. She'd built a fortress around her daughter, one no big plan could breach. A shadow fell across the grass and Grace looked up, her breath catching. Mark stood there, his once impeccable suit now creased, his face etched with a weariness she didn't recognize. His eyes, those same eyes mirrored in hope, locked onto her, then flicked to their daughter, who clutched a leaf, oblivious. Grace stood, her posture steady, her curls swaying like a banner. The park's chatter faded, leaving only the weight of this moment, a collision of her past and present. "Grace," Mark said, his voice rough as if scraped from some buried place. "I didn't expect to see you." His gaze lingered on Hope, a flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossing his face. Grace's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a quiet fire. She remembered the glass door, Amber's smirk, his cold command to leave. The man before her was no longer the king of her world. He was a ghost, diminished by the life she'd forged. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, her voice calm but edged, a blade honed by years of survival. He shifted, his hands in his pockets, his confidence frayed. I owe you an apology," he said, his words halting. "I was wrong. About everything." The admission hung between them, fragile and late. Grace's mind flashed to his mother's letter, the big plan that had cast her out, and Amber's glittering necklace. His apology was a pebble tossed into the ocean of her pain. Too small, too late. She stepped closer, Hope's hand warm in hers. "I don't need your words anymore," she said, her tone steady, each syllable a declaration of freedom. Mark's eyes widened, searching for the Grace he'd shaped, but she was gone. The woman before him was radiant, her curls a defiant crown, her sweater a soft armor. Hope tugged at her hand, holding up the leaf. "Mama, look," she chirped, and Grace knelt, her smile pure. "It's beautiful, love," she said, her voice a melody. She rose, meeting Mark's gaze with indifference, the kind that cut deeper than anger. He opened his mouth, perhaps to plead, but Grace turned away, her curls catching the sunlight. "Come on, Hope," she said, lifting her daughter into her arms. "We've got a whole world ahead." She walked away, Hope's laughter a song against the rustling leaves. Mark called her name once, softly, but she didn't look back. The park stretched before her, a canvas of possibilities, meadows to paint, dreams to chase, a life unbound by his rules. Grace's steps were light, her heart unburdened. Her art, her daughter, her strength, they were hers, earned through nights of despair and days of rebuilding. The shelter Mama Rose, the women who'd shared her pain, they were woven into her now, a foundation stronger than Mark's gilded cage. The big plan was a shadow, powerless against her light. She imagined her next painting, a woman and child hand in hand, walking into a sunrise, curls wild and free. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, Grace paused to let Hope chase another leaf. Her sweater glowed in the fading light, her curls a halo of resilience. Mark was gone, a fading figure in the distance, his world no longer hers. She whispered to Hope, "We're writing our own story now." The park, the city, the future, they were hers to shape, a blank page waiting for her colors. Grace smiled, her heart full, and stepped forward, ready to paint the unwritten. Grace's journey, from a gilded cage to a radiant, unwritten future, ends with her standing tall, her curls free, her daughter's hand in hers. She turned betrayal into strength, painting a life vibrant with hope. What did her story stir in you? Did her defiance spark your own? Share your thoughts below. Tell us what moved you, where you're listening from, or when her courage resonated most, whether over morning coffee or a midnight pause. Your reflections weave this tale into our shared tapestry. Thank you for walking with Grace, for feeling her pain and triumph. Your presence brings her story to life. Stay with us for more journeys that break and rebuild the heart. Until then, keep chasing your unwritten future.